And literacy, the literacy campaigns. 1961 in Cuba, it was called the Year of Education. When the teenagers, the young communists, the teenagers went into the countryside to teach the peasants how to read, and a lot of it wasn't necessarily just that the peasants couldn't read the leaflets. It was, these are the people who are going to run the country, so they need to participate in the culture of this country. They need to build a culture in this country of the majority, and the only way to do that is to read. In Russia, literacy. In China, literacy campaigns. In Cuba, in Nicaragua, they all had total confidence. All these communist leaderships, they had total confidence in the people. They wanted the people to learn to read because they were the people who were going to run things, and they needed to know how to read. That was the critical thing.
It's only, to me, it's just shocking that Cuba has managed to survive, considering the blockade and considering how oppressed it has been. Especially since the death of the Soviet Union.
And that's the thing that, I was touching on before with even the early Soviet Union, it was very hard for them to survive, in the beginning. They were blockaded and starving. That's how every revolution's been. Whenever there's a revolution, they try to overturn it. Even now, I'm blown away by the fact they call Hugo Chavez in Venezuela a dictator. That's what you'll hear on the news. But every election that's ever been there has been monitored by the UN, the Carter Foundation, the Organization of American States, and have ruled that he's gotten the majority of the votes in every election. The death penalty has been illegal in Venezuela since the 1850s. No torture, but somehow he's a dictator.
Yeah, plus, we've seen so much filmed recording of it. We talked last week about the birth of democratic centralism. These workers' councils all over Venezuela. Everybody has a voice.
Right,
which was the same as with the Cuban Revolution.
In fact, in Venezuela, there's 6 television stations, and only one of them supports Chavez, and that's the state TV. All of the private media are lined up against him, 24/7 preaching anti-Chavez stuff. Yet somehow he's a dictator. I can't get it around my head how Hugo Chavez is a dictator. But if you just listen to the capitalist press, they just say it, and then no one questions
Capitalism survives by theft and lies.
It blows my mind. And they have Soviets there. They call them the Bolivarian circles, they're called. Yes. Every neighborhood has the Bolivarian circle, where they get together and they mobilize the community, and they take care of stuff. And they're even, one thing that Chavez is doing that's really pissing them all off is he's dissolving half of the state military and replacing it with popular militias. Like the Bolsheviks, did, and the Cubans. The Cubans. The move toward. You can't get more democratic than what Venezuela's doing.
Defenders of the Russian Revolution, they put him in charge of looking through all the Tsar's secret police files, and he wrote a book in the early 1920s while he was in Russia called "What Every Worker Should Know About the Secret Police," which is basically using the Tsar's secret police files to explain to workers all over the world, this is how you can defeat the secret police, this is how you can defeat the political police, the Red Squads, the FBI, whoever you're up against, in building your unions and building your community organizations to fight back for jobs and to fight for housing. And these are the things you need to look for, and this is how you have to act to avoid unnecessary attacks and unnecessary provocations, and follow these guidelines. And these are the guidelines that I encourage anybody here to, if you want to go to Marxist Internet Archive on the web, there's a copy of the book right there, and it definitely pays rereading.
He was a Frenchman?
Yeah, Victor
was the archives in French? Because I know that French
it was in Russian, but the book was published all over the world in the early 1920s. But the Bolsheviks put everyone to work that they could lay their hands on, no matter what country they came from, because the Bolsheviks knew that the Russian Revolution wasn't a Russian phenomenon. It just happened to happen in Russia first, and they were trying to bend every effort they could to speed the process of building parties that could lead popular struggles in every country around the world.
I know one thing they revealed was the secret treaty. Because the Tsar had signed all these secret treaties with foreign countries that were not public, and they pulled them all out and made them public at that point. People were shocked.
Another thing I wanted to say, getting back to the question of the peasantry, land for the peasants, is my grandmother owned a farm, and she was a very strong anti-communist. So we had a lot of discussions when I was a teenager.
Right.
And she said, you know, if there was communism in this country, they'd come and tell me what crops I have to grow. And I said, the place where you sell your crops today tells you what you better grow next year if you don't want to go broke.
That's right.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
It's a dictatorship of agribusiness that's determining everything that happens here.
That's
It's
right.
the invisible hand, right? Whereas in socialism, we can
Yeah.
say we need more wheat, we need more this. It's production for need, not for profit.
Well,
I always tell the story of when I went to the movie theater one time, and I went to get a drink, and I didn't know the movie theater fountain drinks cost $3. So they said, okay, that'll be $3.50, and I said, well, I've only got $1 here, and so they dumped it out and threw it in the trash. You know, right? And they could have given it to me, you know, but they didn't because they don't produce things for usability, they produce them for sellability. Just like, you know, during the Great Depression, there were, you know, all kinds of people hungry and all of that, and they would pour them out.
oranges into the ocean.
Dumped them into the ocean rather than give them to people, because if they gave them to people, people wouldn't buy it, because they're not making it so people need it, they're making it because, you know, they want to make a profit, and that's the invisible hand, that's Adam Smith. And it doesn't correspond with human need, which is the big myth of the market capitalism. The invisible hand doesn't care about you, me, or anybody.
It reminds me of a question I had.
Yeah.
There was one capitalist economist, I forget his name, but he said that socialism will never work because there's no actual way to gauge prices. I think this was von Mises, I'm not sure.
Oh, well.
So that you always have these problems of not knowing how much to charge for something and how much of it to make because you can't figure it out. How did they actually get around that in the Soviet Union?
Well, he's coming from the idea that money is magic, and that if you're using money, and money is the basis of your society, then money will always solve the problem for you of how much you should charge for your fruit or your grain.
But even in socialism, how do we distribute the goods without having some sort of tokens, coupons or something?
Lenin talked about in State and Revolution how there is
food should be free.
There is
you don't have to worry about what to pay for it. Food should be free.
Accumulation is not inherently evil, is what it gets to. There are some social goods to be served by accumulation. You have to accumulate over the winter so that you can have the wherewithal to plant in the spring. And
Not anymore.
But please, money allows you to do some useful things. Money isn't an inherent evil, but it's capitalism that's evil, and it's concentrating this accumulation in the hands of a few at the expense of everyone. And that's the evil here. So it isn't money that's evil, it isn't accumulation that's evil, but it's the exploitation of the many by the few that's evil.
So I understand. What I mean is, how do we figure out how much to charge for something? Because the way it works in capitalism, and it doesn't do a very good job of it at all. Since everything is a commodity, you know how much of it to make. X product costs $20. So many people are going to buy them. You know, they're able to figure it out that way. And you have the problem of things.
Well, prices aren't set only by market dynamics. So there's more. It's a more complicated relationship than that.
Well,
and you have several different kinds of value.
I know in the Soviet Union they had what was called the State Committee on Prices, you know, and it was a popular organization, and they determined, you know, how much the state needed to intake, and then how much, people needed to get by, and they came to not a consensus, but a pretty close understanding of what to set the prices at. And also in socialism, money has a totally different character. In socialism, money is a certificate of hours worked. In socialism, it's you work this long, you get this much money. That's what it is. It's in socialism. There's no there's no stock market. There's none of that. It's you work so long in the industry, and you put in your work and you get your certificate showing that you work this much. That's what it was in the Soviet economy.
The wealth of capitalism is money, and the wealth of socialism is workers.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not like 1 hour ever equaled a ruble in Soviet Russia, regardless of what you did, because they did incentivize labor.
Yeah, but they incentivized it based on a plan. They didn't incentivize it based on...
But I'm saying,
Right, yeah.
it's not that simple.
Right.
How did they incentivize it?
They determined like what was the most, if they needed certain people to do more, like if they needed, or not to do more, but to do a certain job, like say they needed, more people to build construction, right? They would incentivize construction, and they would set the wages for construction workers a little bit higher so as to incentivize more people to go into it. But it was called economic planning, where, you determine, and popular organizations elect representatives that determine how things are allotted in the economy and where things go and all of that, I think. I would say.
But fundamentally, no socialist knows how prices are going to be set under socialism, because there's not some manual we all have in the basement that
Of course.
says year 43, this is how it's going to be.
Oh, I know, I didn't mean it that way.
No.